It's mid-2000s and BMW is desperately looking for a new audience. In their quest to reimagine themselves to enter the hearts and minds of younger generations, the Germans put all of their engineering efforts into this new, emerging off-road market. That's how their 450 dirt bike came to be, we have a video on it. But even before that, the Bavarians saw a gap in the market.
Back then, big thumping dual sports were crude, either taken straight from the dinosaur era or slightly too racy, uncompromised.
Understandably so, they saw an empty space for a dual sport with more manners, one that could really bring modern amenities to the space. With that, the G650X quickly turned into an all-out engineering exercise with no cost spared in developing this bike.
If BMW got this right, they could have taken over the space, redefined their brand. The thing is, when you let engineers loose, this can usually go both ways.
By 2006, the G650X lineup was launched, with all production being handled by Aprilia in Italy. They came out with 3 models based on the same platform, the X-Moto, X-Country and XChallenge. The latter is the one we'll mostly be focusing on today, and fun fact, BMW really wanted people to pronounce the X as cross.
Which makes sense for cross-country, but cross-moto and cross-challenge? Don't know about that.
First thing you need to understand, these motorcycles didn't aim at replacing anything. The Germans still kept their old F650 on offer. This new series came as more of a complement, a way to diversify their offerings. Think about it, a lot of dual sports back then seemingly stayed behind. The Honda XR650L was still on sale in many countries, and that was a bit of a dinosaur even 20 years ago. What BMW came up with was the exact opposite of the Honda. They took the Rotax unit from their existing F650 and used that as base for the new machines. The German engine manufacturer was going to keep building those new units, and at launch, their specs were more than respectable.
A liquid-cooled 652cc single producing a very respectable 53 horsepower, mated to a 5-speed gearbox. By itself, this power unit isn't that surprising.
The fuel injection system was though. Even for the early days of FI, the system was butter smooth, many praising how direct it felt. Remember, this was 2006, a time when snatchy throttles were standard equipment on many bikes. That's the funny part. For what turned out to be the most conventional part of the entire machine, this was also one of its highlights. Remember how I said Rotax built the engines? That's only partially true. In fact, from 2008, on specific models, the Germans outsourced their power units to Longchin in China. Assuming the quality control stayed the same, this wouldn't necessarily be an issue. Some people do say those units were poorly made, but I'm not sure if that's just bias speaking or actually true. What is true is that for BMW, they were good enough, as the Chinese-built engines stayed in their lineup for upcoming models as well.
In theory, BMW knew what the dual sport needed in order to be really capable off-road. The XChallenge got an 1821 wheel setup,
and the engineers managed to fit the entire gas tank underneath the seat. This greatly improved weight distribution, and it worked wonders alongside the frame. They gave it a pretty relaxed rake, meaning the motorcycle would become really stable in faster, straight lines. Sure, that did compromise its turning in slower situations, but it was a trade-off. They also didn't skimp on suspension, giving the motorcycle 270mm of travel front and rear.
For context, that's more than a modern KTM 690 and just 30 mils shy of current enduro bikes. So far, so good. This looked like a solid contender. But here's where the engineers really went overboard, because that suspension was far from conventional.
For the rear, the XChallenge borrowed the same Continental-developed system from its bigger brother, the HP2. This was an air suspension system that ditched the old coil and spring hydraulic damper for an all-air solution. When rebounding, the system would channel the inside air through little holes, thus slowing down the system in a controlled fashion.
In essence, it worked similar to an oil shock, but remember, unlike fluids, air is compressible. So the engineers decided to use those properties to replace the duty of a regular spring.
The more you think about it, the more brilliant it becomes. Because you can compress air, this in turn created a progressive effect. Essentially, the harder the hit, the harder the shock would get, in theory allowing it to be soft in the first part of the stroke, and gradually getting stiffer on the bigger jumps. This revolutionary system was lighter, more adjustable, it even came in with a water level indicator to allow riders to properly set its sag.
But the Germans didn't stop here. From what I found, they engineered the system with what's called frequency-related damping.
In essence, the shock could vary its characteristics depending on throttle application and terrain. They adjusted it in such a way that it reacted perfectly to bumpy situations, by tuning it to react to frequencies transmitted through the swing arm. Really clever stuff, no way around it. In theory, this was going to obliterate any contender, technology that no dual sport could ever dream of before. Well, that's assuming it actually worked. The only thing left to do was to take it racing, show how sturdy this new platform could be. While BMW didn't have an official rally factory team at this time, in 2008, Guido Faber decided to convert an existing G650 and take on the Dakar Rally. This was the first time BMW's new platform would be tested in such a rough environment. Guido went to Touratech and together they modified the Bavarian Stallion. The bike got an extra 16-liter tank stuck on the front end, and builders decided to replace its air suspension with a more conventional Öhlins shock. Remember this, as it will become a bit of a theme. With bigger radiators, Guido was eager to get his African adventure started. And that never got to happen. You see, 2008 was the year when ASO was forced to cancel the rally, literally days before its inception.
While 2008 was not its year, the G650 came back 12 months later in the hands of Simon Pavey.
Also featuring a Touratech kit and an Öhlins shock, he managed to take the BMW all the way to the finish line, coming in 68th. A great performance for Simon, one that proved the G650X was indeed sturdy enough. It could finish the world's toughest rally.
We were expecting a lot from the XChallenge. To showcase its abilities, BMW organized a dusty trek through the Sonoran Desert.
So far, everything I said about it sounds brilliant. How could such a bike fail? It was new, innovative, and many magazines praised it as such.
Some even wrote about it as this was the second coming of Jesus. Here is the place where things start to go south. You see, not everyone saw it the same. Cycle World managed to sniff through BMW's PR department and realized that the G650X was not what the Bavarians advertised it to be. It wasn't a hardcore racy off-roader.
It was $1,600 more than a competitor Husky. To give you a direct quote from back in the day,
but despite what BMW's promotional materials might claim, it's a long way from being a competitive enduro bike, and an even longer way from being competitively priced. BMW had a vision. It wanted to do it all with this one simple motorcycle. They strived to reach a younger, sportier audience that could transform the brand's image. They called the XChallenge a hard enduro bike in their own press release. They wanted to give the off-road capabilities of a 450 in a package that was happy to crunch the miles. A modern platform with ABS, LED lights, all modern amenities that at the time were only seen on street bikes. Actually, only on a select few.
The reality is, BMW wanted this to be everything, and that set huge expectations. Problem was, when people got to ride it, the bike weighed 156 kilos, far from the hard enduro weapon the Bavarians advertised.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not faulting the bike here, because in reality, it was a good dual sport. But a dual sport nonetheless, with weight and characteristics to follow. Yet for some reason, BMW wanted to inflate its image to make it look like something it was never really meant to be. If their market positioning would have been the only issue, they probably could have pulled through. People would have realized all the engineering innovations after a while, and the platform would have been more popular. But those innovations, well, they weren't without problems. Take the air damping system. Sounds great in theory. In fact, it was so good that the most popular modification was a regular coil swap from Öhlins. Yeah, it had some issues.
First, setting it up proved to be a real fuss. BMW provided users with an under-seat pump for on-the-fly adjustments, but the sole act of setting it up was messy.
This rear shock proved to be very delicate. Get its settings right, and it was perfect. But if you were 1% higher or lower, the bike would either bottom out instantly or never absorb any bumps. It was so delicate, many users tried over and over and over again to get that pressure just right. And when they did, it was oftentimes by mistake.
And here's the thing. Air expands and contracts with temperature. So getting the pressure right on a cold morning could make for an excessively stiff setup in the afternoon. But even if, by some miracle, you were able to find that sweet spot...
So Matt, how do you like that G650X Challenge that you got, 3,000 miles on?
Well, it was all fine and dandy till this afternoon when the shock fell out the ass end of it.
These systems were notorious for leaking air. So you would come a few days later and your rear suspension was all messed up, saggy. It's one of those ideas that sounds amazing on paper, yet in the real world, it's more of a pain. And then there's the rest. The fuel tank was limited to just 9.5 liters, allowing for a range that was far from exceptional. The mid-mounted reservoir was good for weight distribution, but it also made the entire motorcycle stand really tall, with a seat height not many could get comfortable with. While the engines were pretty reliable, some other components? Not so much. Apparently, hitting the shifter at the wrong angle could mean an entire engine out job. Some models reportedly had numerous electrical gremlins. And yet, that's not what killed the G650X.
No, it wasn't the engineering fault. At launch, this new BMW had a retail price of almost $9,000. For perspective, that's about $14,000 in today's money.
It was supposed to be a bare bones, simple, affordable off-road BMW. Yet those traits came in at a price. This was BMW's biggest mistake. Indeed, compared to their other models, this BMW was cheap. The Bavarian customers were accustomed to paying these premiums, but their new target market, the youth that grew up on dirt bikes? For them, this high price wasn't a normality. A BMW logo could never justify it. Adding straws to the fire, remember when this appeared on showroom floors? It was 2007.
If only there was some big economic event that happened around the same time. Yeah, the financial crisis put its last nail in the coffin. At that price point, the G650X never really stood a chance.
As people found it hard to get by, never mind buying expensive BMWs. Because of its short run, nowadays, the G650X is an abandoned platform. Parts are not easy to find, and the bike never gathered a large enough community around it. Simply because there are not that many out there. Looking back, BMW never really understood the off-road market. They built something on top of an unknown, adding Farcos to a motorcycle that was, ideologically, flawed. Those engineers had overdone it. Again. Remember, the more innovation you pour into a project, the more it's going to change the way riders adapt to it. At the same time, its pricing goes higher and higher. This sealed its fate.
And the G650X series had to die together with other ingenious, over-engineered BMW machines. In fact, all these attempts from the mid-2000s seem to have scarred the Germans.
As ever since, 2 decades later, they have never attempted it again. They never built another off-road machine. And honestly, I don't see them doing it anytime soon.